The yellow school bus pulled up to the grand entrance of Westlake Academy. The doors swung open with a hiss, and among the chattering students stepped off a boy with dark skin and nervous eyes. Andrew clutched his backpack straps tightly as he looked up at the imposing brick building. This was nothing like his old school in the city. It was the middle of October, an awkward time to start at a new school. Everyone else had already formed their friend groups and settled into routines. Andrew took a deep breath and walked through the heavy wooden doors into his new life. The hallways of Westlake Academy smelled like floor polish and money, trophies-lined glass cases, and large portraits of past principals, all white men with stern faces, watched from the walls. Andrew checked his schedule again and headed toward his first class, trying to ignore the stares that followed him. "You must be the new student," said his homeroom teacher, not quite making eye contact. "Find an empty seat." Andrew nodded and walked to the back of the room. As he sat down, he noticed he was the only black student in the class. A few kids glanced his way, then quickly turned back to their conversations. That night, Andrew sat at the kitchen table with his mom. She looked tired after her 12-hour shift at the hospital, but she still made time to ask about his first day. "It's different," Andrew said, pushing his dinner around his plate. "The classes are harder, and the kids, they already know each other." His mom reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I know it's tough, baby, but this school has one of the best music programs in the state. That's why we're making this work." Andrew looked at the stack of bills on the counter. He knew his mom had taken on extra shifts to afford the tuition at Westlake. She believed in his talent that much. "I don't fit in there," he admitted quietly. "You don't need to fit in," his mom replied. "You just need to be yourself. Your music will do the rest." After dinner, Andrew sat at their old upright piano, the one his grandma had left them. The keys were slightly yellowed with age, and some of the notes in the upper register stuck sometimes, but Andrew loved it more than anything. His fingers moved across the keys, and the familiar melody of Chopin filled their small apartment. When he played, everything else faded away. The awkwardness of being the new kid, the weight of being different, the pressure not to waste his mom's sacrifice, all of it disappeared into the music. The rest of the week at Westlake went much the same. Andrew kept to himself, observing his new classmates from a distance. The rich kids with their expensive clothes and cars. The athletes who high-fived each other in the hallways. The drama kids who practiced their lines loudly at lunch. Andrew didn't know where he fit in this ecosystem. On Friday, he found the music room during lunch break. It was empty, with a beautiful grand piano sitting in the center like a black island. Andrew couldn't resist. He put down his lunch bag and sat at the bench, running his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing down. A piano like this was a dream. "Do you play?" Andrew jumped. A janitor stood in the doorway with his mop. "Yes, sir. Sorry, I shouldn't be in here." "No, it's okay," the janitor said with a kind smile. "This old room could use some music. Most kids here take lessons because their parents make them. Not many play with their heart." Andrew relaxed a little. "My grandma taught me. She studied at Juilliard." The janitor nodded approvingly. "Well, you're welcome here any time during lunch." "I won't tell." That small kindness meant everything. For the first time since arriving at Westlake, Andrew felt like maybe he could carve out a space for himself. The following Monday, Andrew walked into his music theory class. He'd been looking forward to this class the most until he saw the teacher. Mrs. Walsh stood at the front, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, her eyes scanning the room with judgment. When her gaze landed on Andrew, something in her expression hardened. Andrew took a seat, a feeling of unease settling in his stomach. He didn't know it yet, but this woman would become both his greatest challenge and his greatest opportunity to prove himself at Westlake Academy. Andrew arrived early to music theory class the next day. He wanted to make a good impression on Mrs. Walsh, so he chose a seat in the front row and arranged his notebook and pencils neatly on the desk. The classroom walls were covered with posters of famous composers, all old white men with serious faces and wild hair. Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, Chopin. Andrew recognized them from his grandma's old music books. The other students filed in, laughing and talking about weekend parties and upcoming tests. Nobody sat next to Andrew. The empty chairs around him felt like a moat. Mrs. Walsh walked in exactly as the bell rang. She wore a dark blue dress that almost touched the floor and heavy pearl earrings that clicked when she moved her head. Her eyes swept over the class, pausing briefly on Andra before moving on as if you were just another piece of furniture. "Today we continue our study of the Baroque period," she announced, writing the date on the whiteboard in perfect handwriting. "Last week we discussed Bach's influence. Who can remind the class about the key elements of Baroque music?" Several hands shot up. Mrs. Walsh nodded at a girl with long blonde hair. "Yes, Lily?" "Baroque music uses a lot of ornamentation and has complex harmonies," Lily answered. "Excellent," Mrs. Walsh smiled. "Anyone else?" Andrew raised his hand, remembering what his grandma had taught him. Mrs. Walsh's eyes skipped over him. "Thomas?" She called on a boy 2 rows back. "It often uses counterpoint, with different melodies playing against each other," Thomas said. "Very good," Mrs. Walsh nodded approvingly. Andrew kept his hand up. His arm was starting to get tired, but he really wanted to contribute. His grandma had played Baroque music for him since he was little, explaining the stories behind each piece. Finally, when no other hands were raised, Mrs. Walsh sighed slightly. "Yes, I'm sorry. What was your name again?" "Anda, ma'am." "Yes, Andra. Do you have something to add?" Andra lowered his hand, suddenly feeling all eyes on him. Baroque music was also the first time we started seeing basso continuo, a continuous bass line that provided the foundation for the piece, and composers started writing music that showed off the performer's skills. The classroom was quiet. Mrs. Walsh's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's correct," she said, sounding surprised. "Though we'll cover basso continuo next week." She turned away quickly, continuing her lecture without acknowledging Andrew's knowledge further. During the practical portion of class, Mrs. Walsh had students take turns at the upright piano in the corner, demonstrating simple Baroque patterns. When it was Andrew's turn, he sat at the bench and placed his hands on the keys. "Just play the exercise on page 42, Mrs. Walsh instructed, not looking up from her grade book. Andrew played the simple exercise flawlessly, then added a small flourish at the end. A quick run of notes that Bach might have used. His fingers moved confidently across the keys. Mrs. Walsh's head snapped up. "That wasn't in the exercise," she said sharply. "Sorry," Andrew replied. "I just thought." "This is music theory class, not a talent show," she cut him off. "Please stick to the assignment." Andrew's face grew hot as he returned to his seat. He could feel the other students watching him. After class, Andrew hung back, gathering his books slowly. When the room had emptied, he approached Mrs. Walsh's desk. "Mrs. Walsh, I just wanted to say I'm really excited about your class. My grandma taught me piano since I was 5, and she always said understanding theory makes you a better musician." Mrs. Walsh looked up from her papers, studying Andrew properly for the first time. "Your grandmother taught you?" she asked. Andrew nodded. "She studied at Juilliard, but this was back in the 60s, and she didn't get to finish." Something flickered across Mrs. Walsh's face, recognition, perhaps, or skepticism. "Juilliard has always had very high standards," she said finally. "What was her name?" "Eleanor Taylor," Andrew said proudly. Mrs. Walsh's expression changed, but Andrew couldn't read it. "I see," she said simply. "Well, Andrew, this class will be challenging. We focus on classical traditions and proper technique. Some students find they aren't prepared for the rigor." The warning in her voice was clear. Andrew nodded politely. "I understand, Mrs. Walsh," he said. "I'm ready to work hard." As he left the classroom, Andrew couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how hard he worked, Mrs. Walsh had already decided he didn't belong there. The thought hurt, but he remembered his grandma's words. "Music speaks when words fail. Let your playing answer their doubts." Walking down the empty hallway, Andrew made a promise to himself. He would let his music do the talking. 3 weeks had passed since Andrew started at Westlake Academy. The fall air was getting crisp, and colorful leaves crunched under his feet as he walked to school. He'd settled into a routine, keeping his head down, doing his work, and spending lunch periods in the music room, where the janitor, Mr. Ray, sometimes stopped by to listen. Today, Mrs. Walsh had a special announcement. Andrew slid into his seat just as the bell rang. "Class," she said, clapping her hands together, "we're beginning our composer research projects today." She held up a stack of papers. You'll each select a classical composer and prepare a 10-minute presentation about their life, significance, and major works. You'll also perform a short piece by your chosen composer. A murmur of excitement ran through the room. This was the first big project of the semester. Mrs. Walsh began passing out the assignment sheets. I've prepared a list of suggested composers, but if you have someone else in mind, come see me for approval. Andra scanned the list. Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Liszt, Tchaikovsky, Debussy, and over a dozen others. All European men. His heart sank a little. Then an idea flickered to life. After class, he approached Mrs. Walsh's desk, where a line of students had formed to discuss their choices. When his turn came, Andrew cleared his throat. Mrs. Walsh, I'd like to do my project on Scott Joplin. Mrs. Walsh looked up from her planner, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Who? Scott Joplin, Andrew repeated. He composed ragtime music in the late 1800s and early 1900s. He wrote Maple Leaf Rag and The Entertainer. My grandma said he was called the King of Ragtime. The classroom had grown quiet. The remaining students were listening in. That's not classical music, Mrs. Walsh said dismissively. Pick someone from the list, please. Andrew felt his chest tighten, but he stood his ground. Actually, Joplin studied classical composition. He wrote an opera and a ballet. He combined European classical techniques with African American musical traditions. His work influenced later classical composers like Gershwin. Mrs. Walsh's mouth tightened into a thin line. She set down her pen with a click. Andrew, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, in this classroom, we study serious classical music with historical importance, not dance hall entertainment. Heat crawled up Andrew's neck and into his face. Joplin's music does have historical importance, he said, his voice quieter now. He won a Pulitzer Prize posthumously. That's enough, Mrs. Walsh cut him off. I've given you my answer. Either choose from the list or I'll assign you someone. The silence in the room was heavy. Andrew could feel the other students staring at him. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, a few even smirked. I'll take Chopin, Andrew finally said, gathering his courage. But I still think Joplin deserves recognition. Mrs. Walsh's nostrils flared. You're entitled to your opinion, of course, but in my 30 years of teaching, I've learned what constitutes proper musical education. She turned to the next student. Thomas, who have you selected? Andrew walked out of the classroom with his head held high, but his hands were shaking. In the hallway, he could hear whispers following him. Did you see her face when he talked back? He's got guts, I'll give him that. She's gonna fail him now for sure. Andrew ducked into the bathroom and leaned against the cool tile wall, breathing deeply. Was standing up for himself worth making an enemy of his teacher? But how could he stay silent when she dismissed someone important to him and his heritage? At lunch, Andrew went to his usual spot in the empty music room and sat at the piano. Instead of playing, he just stared at the keys. The confrontation with Mrs. Walsh kept replaying in his mind. The door creaked open, and Mr. Ray walked in with his mop bucket. Why so quiet today? The janitor asked, noticing Andrew's slumped shoulders. Andrew sighed. I got into an argument with Mrs. Walsh about my composer project. Mr. Ray nodded knowingly. Let me guess, you picked someone she didn't approve of. Scott Joplin, Andrew confirmed. She said he wasn't serious music. Mr. Ray leaned on his mop handle. You know, I played saxophone in a jazz band for 20 years before I took this job. People always want to put music in neat little boxes. Classical here, jazz there, blues in another corner. But real music doesn't care about those boxes. He walked over and tapped the piano lid gently. This thing doesn't know if it's playing Bach or Joplin or Duke Ellington. It just makes the sound you tell it to make. Andrew smiled faintly. So what should I do about my project? Sometimes you gotta play by their rules to earn the right to change the game, Mr. Ray said wisely. Learn Chopin so well that she can't find a single thing to criticize. Then, when the time is right, show her what else those fingers can do. Andrew nodded, feeling a new determination. I'll make it the best Chopin presentation she's ever seen. That's the spirit, Mr. Ray grinned. And maybe someday when you're famous, You can play whatever music speaks to your soul. As Andrew headed to his next class, he made a decision. He wouldn't let Mrs. Walsh's prejudice stop him from pursuing his passion. He would excel on her terms while staying true to himself. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. The weeks after the Composer Project announcement turned into a quiet battle between Andrew and Mrs. Walsh. Every day brought a new small struggle. During practice sessions, Andrew noticed that Mrs. Walsh would spend 10 minutes helping other students perfect their technique, but when his turn came, she'd stand over him with crossed arms, pointing out every mistake without showing him how to fix it. "Your tempo is uneven," she'd say, tapping her pencil on the music stand, "and your left hand is too heavy." When Andrew asked for advice on how to correct these issues, she'd sigh as if his questions were a burden. "Some things can't be taught," she'd say. "Some students simply have an ear for it, and others don't." But Andrew knew he had an ear for music. His grandma had always said so. After each frustrating lesson, he'd go home and practice twice as hard, his fingers moving across the keys until his mom would knock on his door. "It's almost midnight, honey. The neighbors will complain." One Wednesday afternoon, Mrs. Walsh handed back their music theory tests. Andrew had studied for hours, even missing his favorite basketball game on TV. When he got his paper back, a red C stared up at him. He flipped through the pages, confused. He was sure he'd answered most questions correctly. After class, he approached Mrs. Walsh's desk. "Excuse me, Mrs. Walsh. I think there might be a mistake on my test." She looked up, annoyed at being interrupted. "Yes." Andrew pointed to question 14. "You marked this wrong, but I wrote that a minor seventh chord has a flat seventh, which is correct." Mrs. Walsh glanced at his paper. "Your answer wasn't specific enough." But Thomas wrote the exact same thing, and he got full points. Andrew had seen his friend's paper during class. Mrs. Walsh's eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing me of grading unfairly?" "No, I just..." "Because questioning my professional judgment won't help your grade, Andrew." The threat hung in the air between them. Andrew swallowed his next words and nodded. "Sorry to bother you," he said quietly, tucking the test into his backpack. That evening, Andrew sat at the kitchen table, pushing his rice around with a fork while his mom talked about her day at the hospital. She noticed his silence. "What's wrong, baby? You've barely touched your food." Andrew set down his fork. "Mom, do you think it was a mistake to transfer me to Westlake?" His mom put down her glass of water. "Why would you ask that? Is someone bothering you?" "Not exactly." Andrew struggled to explain. "It's my music teacher. I think she doesn't like me." "Why wouldn't she like you? You're a wonderful piano player." "I don't know. Maybe because he gestured to his skin. His mom's face softened with understanding and pain. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Listen to me. There are people in this world who will judge you before they know you. That's their loss and their shame, not yours. But she's my teacher. She decides my grades. Then you work twice as hard. You play so well she can't ignore it." His mom squeezed his hand. "Your grandma faced worse than this, and she never gave up. Music was her way of fighting back." Andrew thought about this. His grandma had told him stories about being the only black student at her music school, about playing concerts where she wasn't allowed to use the front entrance of the hall. "I'm not giving up," he decided. "I just wish it wasn't so hard." "The things worth having usually are," his mom said. "Now eat your dinner. You need strength for all that practicing." The next day, Andrew arrived at school early. He slipped into the music room, grateful to find it empty. He needed time at the piano before facing Mrs. Walsh's class again. He played Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the piece he'd chosen for his project. His fingers danced across the keys, pulling emotion from deep inside him. Anger, frustration, determination, all of it poured into the music. He was so lost in playing that he didn't hear the door open. That's quite ambitious. Andrew's hands froze on the keys. Mrs. Walsh stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Ballade No. 1 is considered one of the most difficult pieces in piano literature," she said, walking into the room. "Most of my students choose something simpler for their projects." Andrew straightened his back. "My grandma taught me this piece last year." Mrs. Walsh raised an eyebrow. "Did she now? And you believe you've mastered it?" Not mastered, Andrew said carefully. I'm still working on the middle section. The key changes are tricky. For a moment, something like respect flickered in Mrs. Walsh's eyes. Then it vanished. Well, it's your grade at stake, she said coolly. Just don't expect special treatment if you can't handle what you've chosen. After she left, Andrew sat quietly for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he began to play again. Each note was a statement. Each phrase was a promise. He would show her, not with anger or arguments, but with music, the universal language that spoke straight to the heart. If she couldn't hear his talent, then she wasn't really listening. That night, Andrew practiced until his fingers ached and his mother had to remind him 3 times that it was a school night. He played the difficult passages over and over until they flowed naturally. I'm going to play so well, he whispered to himself in the darkness of his bedroom, that she'll have no choice but to hear me. Fall turned to winter, and the hallways of Westlake Academy were decorated with paper snowflakes and tinsel. Students buzzed about holiday plans and family trips to warm places. Andrew had settled into a routine, earning respect in his other classes, while continuing his quiet battle with Mrs. Walsh in music theory. One Monday morning in January, the principal's voice crackled over the loudspeaker during homeroom. Attention students and faculty. I'm pleased to announce that our annual spring recital will be held on April 15th in the main auditorium. This prestigious event showcases our finest musical talent and is attended by parents, alumni, and special guests from various music institutions. Andrew's heart skipped a beat. He'd heard about the spring recital from other music students. It was a big deal, the biggest performance opportunity of the year. For those interested in performing, the principal continued, auditions will be held the first week of March. Please see your music teachers for details. Thank you. The classroom erupted into excited chatter. A girl in front of Andrew turned around. Are you going to audition? She asked. It was Zoe, who sat next to him in music class sometimes. She was one of the few students who actually talked to him. I'd like to, Andrew replied. How tough is it to get in? Zoe tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Pretty tough. Mrs. Walsh only picks a few students each year. But you're really good. I've heard you playing in the music room sometimes. Andrew smiled, surprised by the compliment. Thanks. Are you auditioning? Yeah, on violin. My sister performed 2 years ago, and she said there were scouts from Juilliard and Berkeley in the audience. The bell rang, and students gathered their books. Andrew couldn't stop thinking about the recital as he walked to his next class. This could be his chance to prove himself, not just to Mrs. Walsh, but to everyone. In music theory that afternoon, Mrs. Walsh stood at the front of the class, holding a stack of papers. As you've heard, the spring recital auditions are approaching, she announced. This is not an opportunity for beginners or hobbyists. The spring recital represents the excellence of Westlake's music program. She began passing out information sheets. The requirements are strict. You'll need to prepare a classical piece demonstrating advanced technique. Your theory grades must be at least a B average. Andrew quickly checked the requirements. His theory grade hovered around a C+ despite his best efforts. He'd need to bring it up before March. I'll be selecting participants based on audition performance, Mrs. Walsh continued. Her eyes swept the room and landed on Andrew. Technical precision and classical sensibility are essential qualities I'll be looking for. The way she emphasized those words while looking at him sent a clear message. Andrew straightened in his seat, meeting her gaze steadily. After class, students lined up to sign the audition list Mrs. Walsh had placed on her desk. Andrew waited until most had left before approaching. Mrs. Walsh watched him over her reading glasses as he picked up the pen. Andrew, she said, are you sure about this? The spring recital has certain standards. Andrew wrote his name in neat letters. Yes, Mrs. Walsh, I'm sure. She pursed her lips. The audition piece must be classical. No exceptions. I understand, Andrew said politely. Perhaps something more. Accessible would be appropriate for your skill level, she suggested. Her voice softened in a way that sounded helpful but felt dismissive. Beethoven's Far Elist, perhaps, or are you still set on the Chopin? I'll be playing Balladino, one in G minor, Andrew confirmed. Mrs. Walsh raised an eyebrow. That's extremely ambitious. Even my advanced seniors struggle with that piece. I've been practicing it for months, Andra said. Mrs. Walsh closed the sign-up book with a snap. Well, I wouldn't want to discourage you, but given your background, you might feel more comfortable with the jazz band showcase later in the semester. They perform more contemporary pieces. The implication hung in the air between them. Andra felt his face grow warm, but he kept his voice steady. I appreciate the suggestion, Mrs. Walsh, but I'd like to audition for the recital. She shrugged slightly. As you wish. Just don't be disappointed when, she caught herself, if things don't go as you hope. That evening, Andrew told his mum about the spring recital while they washed dishes together after dinner. That sounds wonderful, she said, handing him a plate to dry. When are auditions? First week of March. But Mrs. Walsh made it pretty clear she doesn't think I should bother. His mum stopped washing, soap suds dripping from her hands. What did she say exactly? Andrew repeated the conversation, trying to keep his voice neutral. His mum's eyes flashed with anger, but she took a deep breath. Listen to me, Andra. People like Mrs. Walsh, they've got fixed ideas about who belongs where. Your grandma dealt with the same thing her whole career. She dried her hands and gently turned Andra to face her. But you have something special. When you play, it's like your soul is speaking through those keys. No teacher gets to decide if that voice deserves to be heard. Andrew nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Now his mom said, what do you need to prepare for this audition? I need to practice even more. And bring up my theory grade. Then that's what we'll do. I'll talk to my supervisor about switching today's shifts so I'm home in the evenings to help you study. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she said firmly. When someone tries to close a door in your face, we kick it down together. That's how we've always done things in this family. That night, Andrew sat at the piano in their small apartment, playing softly with the mute pedal engaged. As his fingers moved across the keys, he imagined the auditorium filled with people, all watching as he played. He imagined Mrs. Walsh's face when she realized she had underestimated him. He wasn't just playing for himself anymore. He was playing for his mom, who worked double shifts to give him this opportunity. For his grandma, who had taught him to love music despite the doors that had been closed to her. And for every kid who'd ever been told they didn't belong. The spring recital was no longer just a performance. It was a statement. March arrived with a mix of rain and sunshine, the weather as unpredictable as Andrew's emotions. Audition day was finally here. For weeks, he practiced until his fingers cramped, studying music theory until the notes and symbols danced in his dreams. He'd brought his grade up to a B, just enough to qualify. That morning, Andrew could barely eat breakfast. His mom pushed a plate of toast toward him. You need your strength today, she said, watching him with concerned eyes. Andrew took a small bite. My stomach feels like it's full of butterflies. That's normal, his mom assured him. Your grandma always said a little nervousness keeps you sharp. He nodded, glancing at the clock. I should go. I want to warm up before my slot. His mom hugged him tightly. Whatever happens today, I'm proud of you. The school hallway seemed longer than usual as Andrew walked to the music department. Other students clutched sheet music and instrument cases, their faces showing the same nervous energy he felt. Outside the audition room, the large ensemble practice space, a line of students waited their turn. Zoe waved when she spotted him. Her violin case was propped against the wall beside her. Ready? She asked. As I'll ever be, Andrew replied. Through the closed door, they could hear someone playing a flute piece, the notes floating high and delicate. Mrs. Walsh has 2 other teachers on the panel, Zoe whispered. Mr. Chen from the orchestra and Ms. Patel from the choir. Andrew nodded, grateful for the information. Maybe with other teachers present, he'd get a fairer evaluation. The door opened and a boy with a flute left, looking relieved. The student coordinator checked her list. Zoe Taylor, you're up. Zoe squeezed Andrew's arm. Good luck, she said. I hope we both make it. As Zoe disappeared into the room, Andrew closed his eyes and ran through the piece in his mind, his fingers twitching slightly as if playing invisible keys. He'd practiced so much that the music lived in his body now, not just on the page. 20 minutes later, the door opened again. Zoe emerged, her face flushed. How did it go? Andrew asked. Pretty good, I think. I messed up one passage, but recovered quickly. She gave him an encouraging smile. "They're running behind schedule, but you should be up soon." More students came and went. The hallway slowly emptied as Andrew waited. Finally, the coordinator called his name. Andrew Williams. Andrew took a deep breath and entered the room. It was larger than the regular classrooms, with high ceilings and special acoustic panels on the walls. A grand piano stood in the center, its lid fully open. At a table near the wall sat the three teachers. Mrs. Walsh was in the middle, a clipboard in front of her. "Good afternoon," Andrew said politely. Mr. Chen smiled kindly. "Hello, Andrew. What will you be playing for us today?" Before Andrew could answer, Mrs. Walsh looked up from her clipboard. "Chopin's Baladner, 1 in G minor," she said, a hint of challenge in her voice. "Quite an ambitious choice." "Yes, ma'am," Andrew confirmed, meeting her gaze steadily. Ms. Patel raised her eyebrows, looking impressed. "One of my favorites. Please begin when you're ready." Andrew approached the piano, adjusting the bench to his height. This wasn't the upright he usually practiced on at home, or even the decent grand in the music room. This was a concert-quality instrument, its black surface gleaming under the lights. He placed his hands on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. Andrew closed his eyes for a moment, picturing his grandma sitting beside him as she had during countless practice sessions. "Remember," she always said, "music isn't just in your fingers, it's in your heart." Andrew began to play. The opening notes were gentle, almost questioning, like someone testing unfamiliar waters. Then the melody unfolded, growing more complex with each phrase. At first, he was acutely aware of the judges watching him, of Mrs. Walsh's skeptical expression, but as the music deepened, everything else faded away. The room, the school, even his nervousness, all disappeared until there was nothing but the conversation between his fingers and the piano. The piece told the story, joy and sorrow, triumph and longing, all woven together. Andrew didn't just play the notes, he lived them. His body swayed slightly as his hands moved across the keyboard, building toward the emotional climax of the piece. When he reached the most technically challenging section, the part he practiced hundreds of times, his fingers flew across the keys with a confidence that surprised even him. The notes cascaded like water, each one clear and distinct despite the rapid tempo. Andrew didn't see Mrs. Walsh's pen freeze mid-note or Mr. Chen lean forward in his chair. He didn't notice Ms. Patel's eyes widen in surprise. He was lost in the music, channeling everything he'd experienced over the past months, the frustration, the determination, the hope, into Chopin's masterpiece. As he played the final chords, letting them resonate through the room before gently releasing the pedal, Andrew slowly returned to the present moment. The silence that followed seemed to vibrate with the echoes of what had just happened. He looked up at the judges' table. Mr. Chen's face broke into a wide smile. Ms. Patel was writing rapidly on her notepad, nodding to herself. And Mrs. Walsh, her expression was complex, a mixture of surprise, confusion, and something Andrew couldn't quite identify. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mr. Chen cleared his throat. "That was," he began, then shook his head as if words were inadequate. "Extraordinary," Ms. Patel finished for him. "Your technique is remarkable, but what stands out is your emotional maturity. You didn't just play Chopin, you interpreted him." Andrew's heart pounded as he looked at Mrs. Walsh, waiting for her response. She was staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My grandmother taught me," Andrew said simply. "Eleanor Taylor. She studied at Juilliard in the 60s. Recognition flickered in Mrs. Walsh's eyes. "Eleanor Taylor," she repeated slowly. I've heard recordings of her. She was considered one of the most promising pianists of her generation." "Yes, ma'am," Andrew nodded. "She couldn't finish her degree because of—" He paused, choosing his words carefully, "the circumstances back then. But she never stopped playing, never stopped teaching." The room was quiet again. Andrew could almost feel the weight of history in the air between them. "Thank you, Andrew," Ms. Patel said gently. "We'll post the results next week." Andrew stood and gave a small bow, the way his grandma had taught him. As he turned to leave, he caught a last glimpse of Mrs. Walsh. She was looking down at her clipboard, but her pen wasn't moving. In the empty hallway, Andrew let out a long breath. Whatever happened next, whether he made the recital or not, he had played his heart out. For once, Mrs. Walsh had truly heard him, and in that moment, it felt like victory. The week after auditions crawled by like a turtle crossing a road. Every morning, Andrew checked the music department bulletin board, his heart racing when he saw a small crowd gathered around it on Friday. He hung back until the other students cleared away, some celebrating, others consoling each other. Finally, he stepped forward and scanned the list posted on bright blue paper. There it was. Andrew Williams, piano. Chopin's Balladino, 1 in G minor, listed as the closing performance. The closing spot, the most prestigious position in the program. Andrew read it 3 times to make sure he wasn't dreaming. A hand clapped him on the shoulder. Closing act. That's huge, man, said a boy from his math class. Congrats. Thanks. Andrew managed, still stunned. Zoe appeared at his side, beaming. We both made it. I can't believe you got the closing spot. That hasn't gone to a sophomore in like forever. The news spread quickly through the school. Students who had never spoken to Andrew before suddenly nodded to him in the hallways. His other teachers offered congratulations. Even the principal mentioned it during morning announcements. For the next 2 weeks, Andrew practically lived in the practice rooms. His mom rearranged her work schedule to be home more often, making sure he ate proper meals and got enough sleep. Don't burn yourself out, she warned. Your playing is best when you're rested. The only person who didn't acknowledge his achievement was Mrs. Walsh. In class, she treated him with a cool professionalism, not the hostility of before, but not with the warmth she showed her favorite students either. She corrected his technique during practice sessions with precise, almost clinical instructions. The pedaling in measure 38 needs to be cleaner, she would say, or watch your dynamics in the second movement. It was strange. She was finally teaching him properly, but something still felt unresolved between them. 2 days before the recital, Mrs. Walsh asked Andrew to stay after class. Your piece is coming along well, she said, arranging sheet music on her desk without looking at him. But the closing performance needs to be flawless. Yes, ma'am. Andrew nodded. I'm practicing every day. Mrs. Walsh hesitated, then finally met his eyes. I've scheduled the auditorium for extra practice time this afternoon. If you're interested. Andrew blinked in surprise. You're offering to help me. I'm offering you practice time on the actual piano you'll be using, she corrected, but her tone was softer than usual. It would be a shame to waste your potential due to inadequate preparation. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. Andrew nodded. Thank you. I'd appreciate that. That afternoon, the huge auditorium felt empty with just the 2 of them. Mrs. Walsh sat in the 5th row as Andrew played through his piece. Again, she said when he finished. But this time, consider the acoustics of the room. In a space this size, you need to adjust your touch. For the next hour, she offered specific, technical advice, the kind she'd been giving other students all year but had withheld from him. Andrew soaked up every suggestion, surprised by how helpful she could be when she actually tried. As he gathered his sheet music to leave, Mrs. Walsh cleared her throat. I knew your grandmother, she said suddenly. Andrew froze. You did? Mrs. Walsh nodded, looking somewhere past him. Not personally. But I heard her play once, at a student showcase at Juilliard. I was very young. My piano teacher took me. Elena Taylor was extraordinary. Andrew waited, sensing there was more. Everyone said she would have had a brilliant career. Mrs. Walsh's voice had a faraway quality. It was a different time then. Opportunities were limited. She taught instead, Andrew said quietly. She said teaching was its own kind of performance, watching your students grow. Something shifted in Mrs. Walsh's expression. She taught you well. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of her unfairness. But in that moment, Andrew understood that this was as close as she could come to acknowledging what had happened between them. Thank you, he said simply. The night of the spring recital arrived with all the excitement of a holiday. The auditorium was packed. Parents, teachers, students, and even visitors from music schools and conservatories filled every seat. Backstage, performers adjusted bow ties and smooth dresses, instruments clutched tightly in nervous hands. Andra peeked through the curtain and saw his mom sitting near the front, wearing the blue dress she saved for special occasions. Mr. Ray had come too, sitting a few rows back in his good suit instead of his usual janitor's uniform. Seeing them both there, supporting him, gave Andra a surge of courage. The performances began. A flutist played Mozart, a string quartet performed Beethoven, Zoe played a violin concerto. Each act was met with enthusiastic applause. As the evening progressed, Andrew's nerves settled into a calm focus. He wasn't afraid anymore. This was what he was born to do. Finally, the second-to-last performer left the stage. There was a brief pause as the program shifted to the closing act. Mrs. Walsh stepped onto the stage to introduce him. Our final performer tonight is a sophomore who has demonstrated exceptional talent and dedication, she said, her voice clear and strong. He will be playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that challenges even seasoned pianists with its technical demands and emotional depth. She paused, then added something that wasn't in the printed program. He represents the continuing legacy of classical music, honoring tradition while bringing his own voice to these timeless works. Please welcome Andrew Williams. The spotlight found Andrew as he walked to the grand piano at center stage. The audience applauded politely. He adjusted the bench, took a deep breath, and began to play. From the first notes, he knew this performance was different from any before. Something had shifted inside him, the months of struggle, of feeling out of place, of fighting to be heard. All of it transformed into music that filled the vast space of the auditorium. His fingers moved with confidence and grace across the keys, drawing sounds from the piano that seemed to tell his entire story. The quiet determination of the opening theme, the building complexity as the piece progressed, the thundering passion of the difficult middle section, and finally, the triumphant, emotional conclusion. When the last note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted. They weren't just applauding, they were on their feet. A standing ovation washed over Andrew in waves as he stood and bowed, his heart pounding with joy and disbelief. From the stage, he could see his mom wiping tears from her eyes. Mr. Ray was clapping so hard it looked like it hurt. And in the wings, partially hidden by the curtain, stood Mrs. Walsh. She wasn't clapping. Her hands were pressed together in front of her mouth, her eyes shining with what might have been tears. After the recital, people crowded around Andrew, offering congratulations and questions. A woman from Juilliard's pre-college program handed him her card. "We should talk about your future," she said. Eventually, the crowd thinned. Andrew found his mom waiting for him by the door, beaming with pride. "Grandma would have been so proud," she whispered as she hugged him. As they turned to leave, Mrs. Walsh approached them. She looked different somehow, smaller, less intimidating. "Mrs. Williams," she said, extending her hand to Andrew's mom. "Your son has remarkable talent." "Thank you," his mom replied, her voice polite but reserved. She hadn't forgotten the struggles Andrew had faced. Mrs. Walsh turned to Andrew. "I'd like to discuss your continued training. There are advanced techniques I believe would benefit your playing. Perhaps extra sessions after school." Andrew looked at his teacher, understanding the olive branch she was offering. "I'd like that," he said. As they walked to the car, his mom squeezed his shoulder. "You know, sometimes the best response to people who try to silence you is to make them listen. You didn't just play tonight, you spoke your truth." Andrew smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. From being the outsider, the student Mrs. Walsh tried to sideline, to becoming the star of the recital. He hadn't changed who he was or what he loved. He had simply refused to be defined by someone else's prejudice. And in the end, it wasn't just his playing that had won over the audience and his teacher, it was his persistence, his dignity, and his unwavering belief in his own worth. That was the real music he made tonight, and everyone had heard it, loud and clear.